My name is Darla Shaw, and welcome to Growing Up Ridgefield. Today we have a very exciting presentation and talk by Elaine Kelemen. Elaine is, well, depends how you look at it, second or third generation here, Italian immigrants. Welcome so much, Elaine. I'm so glad you have such a rich historical background.
Thank you, Darla.
Well, I'd like you to start with your grandparents, who were the naturalized citizens, when they came here, why they came here, where they came from, and all of that.
Well, both of my grandparents were Marchigian. Marchigian means man of the Marquis. Le Marche is a province, San Marino in the north, Ancona in the south on the Adriatic Ocean. There is a dispute of who the first Italian came from Le Marche. I know that both my grandfathers were here early 1900s. Paternal grandfather Mariano Perientri came. His first wife had died. He left his daughter Gina Brancini in Italy, and he came to see if he could make a life for himself. My grandfather Giardini, Gaetano Harry Giardini, did the same thing. They both lived in this area with the other Italians. There was a boarding house on what is now Sunset Lane. It was Railroad Avenue. The men lived there, and they took whatever work they came. Most of them were bricklayers, stonemasons, gardeners, and because of the big estates, they were able to get jobs. My paternal grandfather went back to Italy 1907 and married my grandmother and returned to Ridgefield in 1908. My maternal grandfather stayed here. My grandmother came in 1913. They were married either at Ellis Island or in a Catholic church in New York. We're not sure which. There was a society called the St. Raphael Society, which helped Italian immigrants. And so we're not sure whether they took them into the city to be married. So my grandfather Giardini, I know more about my grandfather Giardini because I lived in the house with my maternal grandmother, and I learned a lot from her. Gaetano Giardini started a bar or a tavern with Mr. May on Grove Street. The building is still there, and they had the bar from, like, let's say 1913, maybe 1920, because when Prohibition came, they stopped. They just cut the bar off. My grandparents lived in the building on the second floor. The May family lived on the first floor. 1923, my grandfather bought the house on Prospect Street, and that's where I was raised, and that's where my mother died 102 years later. So she was in the house for 93 years.
Wow, it's great that you have such details in your background. Now, you've always talked about the homes and living right around the Scott House. And tell me now about your parents and living around the Scott House and what went on at that time.
My parents were married in 1939, and they moved. The house on Prospect Street had two apartments. My grandmother Giardini lived on the first floor, and my parents lived on the second floor. And my dad worked in factory. During the war, he was at Rebestis. And then after the war, he worked at the wire mill, but he also was a gardener to various estates in Ridgefield. He'd go to work, he'd work a shift, and then when he came home, he would go to work the second job. My mother either worked at my grandmother's laundry that she started after my grandfather died, or she cleaned people's houses. And then at a later date, she ran the liquor store at Wayside Grocery Store. The neighborhood was literally our family. My next door neighbors were the Pandolfis and the Servatios. So we started there. Mrs. Latanzi lived on the corner, and she had her two daughters who were Stefanellis. One lived on the second floor, the other lived on the third floor. And across the street was Rudy Marconi and his family. Joe Bernetti and lived with his mother and father on the corner. The Petrignanis, who had a grocery store with the Gasparinis at the bottom of the hill where the railroad track was, they were on East Ridge.
Wow.
So it was, there were many more. There were the Marinellis, there were the Lavatories. We did have an Irish family, Mary Sullivan, but Mary Sullivan was a Sponderini, so
She fit in the group.
she fit in with the Italian group. It was more, the neighborhood was more than where we lived, because we went to school on East Ridge. People refer to it as the old high school, but we started on the south end of the building with Miss O'Shea as principal, and we graduated at the north end of the building. Phil Petrozello was my principal, and there was a number of them. So we walked to school every day. There was no buses ever.
And didn't you also go to preschool, which I thought was unusual?
Preschool was on Bailey Avenue. The thing that's so interesting about that is it was Miss Knapp and Miss Claus, and we went to school public at 4 years old. Most kindergartners go.
Wow, that's different.
We went at 4. Miss Knapp was the teacher. Miss Claus was the kindergarten teacher. What I remember about that experience was it was the first time I had ever seen stall bathrooms.
Oh.
That's it's a weird memory, but it was something so different. I had never seen anything like that. So in first grade we went. I can tell you, I had Miss O'Shea was the principal. Then I had Miss Ahern, Miss Kilcoy, Miss Nichols, Mr. Caponera, Miss Davies, and Miss Hurst for the first.
Your memory is absolutely incredible.
For the first 6 years, I don't remember much about what was then called junior high, but I do remember Miss Spicer. Miss Spicer was not only the teacher; she was an English teacher, and she taught us mythology, which I loved. But she was the thespian, and we did plays. And what is now the Playhouse? That stage that is the Playhouse stage was our auditorium. And we did a play called Gorgon the Dog, and I was Gorgon the speaking dog.
Big role.
Yeah, I actually have a picture of it.
Oh.
And then we went into high school. From there, I think we had fantastic teachers. It wasn't the way it is now because we didn't have the choices that the students have.
All the electives, you mean?
Yeah,
right?
all the electives. I think probably the best teacher I ever had from college, graduate school, and I find out that many people think the same thing was Mr. Ballenbach, Mr.
Right.
Dirk Ballenbach. I had him his very first year in Ridgefield. It was American history, and it's not what he said, it was how he taught.
Wow.
And I don't think I realized it at first, but in retrospect, when I left the class, he believed that if you wanted to understand the present, you had to understand the past.
Oh.
And if you wanted to be able to predict the future, you had to understand the present and the past. And you didn't do that with a book, with one paragraph on the Civil War or one paragraph on Prohibition. He was someone who, in 1958, used primary sources. We read the newspapers, we listened to the music, what were people wearing, what were the movies that were popular, what music were they listening to. And in each area that whether it was the Revolutionary War or the Civil War, or it was Prohibition and the Depression, but that as I went to college and then on to graduate school, Mr. Ballenbach, it was like, where is Mr. Ballenbach? And then I found out that so many other people felt the same.
Right. No, you're so true. You paid the most beautiful tribute to a teacher that you could possibly pay. That's beautiful.
Then we had Miss Burdick. Miss Burdick, we had to write a novel with her. She was an English teacher. I had Miss Wills from Latin, and Miss Wills was there when my mother and father were at school.
Oh, wow.
My mother and father graduated in 1932. Miss Wills was at school. I graduated in 1960, and Miss Wills was our Latin teacher, my Latin teacher. John Medeiros was biology teacher. Mr. Casper was the math teacher. It's just they were really
Dedicated.
well, not only that, but they were good. But I don't think I realized it at the time.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know when I was going through it? It was when I started to think about it, and I went into other classes. It was like, oh, she really prepared me, or he really prepared me, or oh, why can't this teacher teach the way that that teacher taught? I graduated in 1960. The principal was Phil Petrozello. I remember him taking me aside one time and saying, because you are an immigrant doesn't mean you can't go to college. You need to go you need to go to college. And I find out from talking to other classmates. I was just talking to Jack O'Keefe about it the other night, and it was the same thing.
That phrase could make a difference. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
tell me also about the influences, the church and the Italian American Club.
I think it was hard to separate the church from the neighborhood, from the families, from the Italian club, because I went to church with the same people I went to school with, the same people I lived with. If I showed you my first Holy Communion picture, it was all the same people. All the girls and boys in that picture were also the families who were at the Italian American Club, who were at St. Mary's.
Wow.
So it was, if they weren't Italian, they were Irish.
And you're still friendly at the History Club. You come as a group with all these people you went to school with early on in life, which I think is amazing.
Yeah. Barbara Torcellini Surfilippi, I graduated with. Joyce Casavecchia Ligi. George Schuster is somebody. George Bessie, who he's still here. Jack O'Keefe lives just a little ways. He's always here. So yeah, but remember there were only 60 people in my graduating class.
Yeah.
So I knew everyone. Unlike kids today who are 300, 400 kids, they don't know. Not only did I go to school with them, but I went to church with them. I went to the Italian.
I see the connection between the three.
The Italian club. It was a group. We were connected. Our parents were connected.
Right.
Elizabeth Ann Venus. Now she was an Irish person, but Dick Venus, who was the town historian, was in my mother and father's class of 1932. So all those people that I was close to in more ways than just going to school with them. I went to church with them. I went to the Italian club with them. My favorite time at the Italian club was Carnival, which was just before Lent, and they had a very big party with dancing, and they served castagnoi, which is kind of like a beignet, and then crucioli, which is a pastry. It was just my favorite time.
Yeah, I remember that. I had been to that as well. I'd like you to talk about some of the misconceptions that people had about Italians in Ridgefield as far as speaking English, as far as their education, the role of women, and so on.
Well, the idea, and people have it today, is that they're illiterate, that immigrants are illiterate. I have letters that my grandfather wrote in Italian to my grandmother, dated 1906, 1903, 1906. Think about that, they started a business. They had to get licenses, they had to apply for them. They didn't have someone doing it for them. They started the Italian American Club. They encouraged us to go to school. They sent my parents encouraged us, and their parents sent them to school. They saw school as a way to get ahead.
Mhm.
I think their whole let's see, how they acted was you put your head down and you work hard, and that's how you prove yourself. But you don't just work. You can better yourself by going to school. And that's a word that I heard a lot.
Right, and you're a great example. Tell us about your educational background and your travel and how rich your life has been.
Graduated from Ridgefield High School, graduated from the University of Oklahoma with a degree in education, and my master's is in child development from Wheelock, which is a part of Boston University. After I finished school, I had the opportunity to go overseas, so there's a very wide network of overseas schools, and I went through international school services. I started out in the Dominican Republic. I was there for 2 years, and from the Dominican Republic I went to Venezuela. I was there for 3 years, and I went to Japan, which was a completely different experience. In each of those, I taught in international schools, very, very different. In in Venezuela and in the Dominican Republic, it was very rich Dominicans, very rich Venezuelans. In Japan, it was a whole different milieu. These were people that wanted a combined Japanese, Australian, British, American experience. Because if you were Japanese and you sent your kids to an international school, it wasn't well accepted. At the school that I taught in Japan, we had a lot of kids, instead of going to the American school in Japan, which was in Tokyo, they came to our schools, and there was a mixture of kids taught in English, but I didn't teach in host country language. It was all in English, and I liked the idea of being on the outside and making it, because I lived by myself. I was there on my own.
Wow, I give you a lot of credit, yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I traveled. When I was in Japan, I went to Vietnam, which is probably one of the most beautiful places. I was there on Christmas Eve, and I went to Ha Long Bay is as pretty as the Vatican.
Wow.
It's hard for people to believe it. Ha Long Bay, when I was there, it's in the Gulf of Tonkin, and I went in a ship or a boat that had the sail looked like the fin of a fish, and we sailed along Ha Long Bay, and they had lots of limestone caves, so you could get out and climb down into the limestone cave
What
and
an
then come up.
experience,
I found the Vietnamese very kind, very happy, even though I was there right after the war. And
well, you've certainly influenced your children and grandchildren too. They have certainly carried on the tradition of excellence in education. Tell us about them.
I have 6.
Okay.
The oldest, Matthew, is a graduate of Ridgefield High School, a Summa graduate of Penn, and a Fulbright scholar.
Wow.
He was a Fulbright in Korea. He reads, writes, and speaks Korean. And at present, he is an intelligence analyst with the Department of Defense. Then there's Lucy. Lucy is graduated from school in Fairport, New York. She went, her undergraduate degree is NYU, her graduate degree is from the Newhouse School at Syracuse.
Yeah.
She is working for the City of New York, for the hospital system of the City of New York. Then there's Adam. Adam went to Ridgefield High School, and he's a graduate of Clemson, and he's looking at grad schools right now. He works for an education company.
Mm-hmm.
Then the next one is Andrew. Andrew went to Colgate. He graduated in 21 from Colgate. He now is the PE swim teacher at Columbia Prep and Grammar School, and he's the assistant swim coach. He was on the swim dive team at Colgate. Just interestingly, it was
Right.
alma mater of his grandfather.
Oh, okay.
His grandfather, Larry Bossity, went to Colgate, and so,
Oh, I didn't realize.
and
that.
Andrew went to Colgate. The next one is Anna Grace. Anna Grace went to Ridgefield High School. She graduated from Holy Cross, and right now she's at the National Institutes of Health. She's doing brain MRIs on schizophrenics and people that have been diagnosed with Williams syndrome, and she's studying for the MCATs.
Wow.
And the last one is Jane Catherine, graduated in Fairport, New York, and is a senior at the University of Vermont in environmental studies.
Okay, I'm going to ask you two more questions. I was, interested. There were 4 in your family, 4 siblings, and you lived in different places, but everyone seems to come home to Ridgefield or stay in Ridgefield. And why is Ridgefield such a grounding place for all of you?
I think because our growing up was so good. It was just the best. I mean, that neighborhood that I grew up in, that neighborhood was my family. And we could go out, and if we misbehaved, my parents knew about it before I get home. My parents never were annoyed if someone called them about something. They counted on the neighborhood to be our family. It was just a great place to grow up, especially when I grew up. Just fantastic. My brother Harry stayed here while I make sure all the kids were in school. He was an athlete at Ridgefield High School, actually. He was the first athlete out of Ridgefield High School to get a D1 scholarship. He played football at Boston College.
Wow, that's impressive.
And it's both his boys. His oldest son played hockey at Boston College, and his youngest son went to Trinity and had the rushing record.
Wow, yeah.
So my sister Sandy was the assistant town clerk for a number of years under Barbara Sirfilippi. My brother John went to Providence and then worked in real estate, and they're still here.
Yeah.
My
No.
brother,
I know John, yeah, and Harry. I didn't know Sandy, yeah.
well, John's son David is still here. Not David, his son Michael is still here, and his daughter Julianne is living here.
Right.
Harry's 2 daughters are living here, raising their children.
There were real roots. The last thing I'd just like to say, did I miss anything? Is there something important that you would like to share about the town, the history, something that people might not know about or be interested in?
I just think Ridgefield's the way it is because so many people contributed it to make it what it is.
You've certainly shown how your family has contributed, and I think that's so true, and that's part of what this program is all about, growing up in Ridgefield and how people have contributed. So
Yeah.
thank you so much, yeah.
I just want to,
Yeah.
my family was one of many,
Yes,
and to me that's the important thing.
right. And I just remember your mother, Dell. Oh my goodness, she threw her own birthday party. She was so strong at 90 years old. I would see her walking the town forever.
Yep.
The Peary-Andrews are also known as the walkers in the town.
My mom had the party at the Italian Club, and all the prior selectmen that were still living, because Lou Fossey was the selectman.
Right?
Romeo Petroni was, I'm trying to think of the people that were
Yeah.
there.
Oh, there wasn't anybody that wasn't, all the important people were there. Yeah.
Yeah.
She was such a role model for so
Yeah,
many in
thank you.
town.
She was just a good person.
Good person.
I
Right.
have to say, you asked me, the last thing is, I was lucky. My parents were just really decent people.
God, that's such a key word today. And we're going to end with the word decent. And thank you so much, Elaine. I always love listening to your stories. And you have such a memory. It is incredible. Okay, thank you so much for tuning in and listening to our program on the immigrants in Ridgefield today and just growing up in general.